I'm just kidding. There's not actually a spider over there. But chances are, if there were a spider in this room right now, a lot of you would freak out. I mean, I've seen someone actually start crying because they saw a daddy longlegs on the other side of the room. It's clear to see that spiders are a very common fear of ours. But have we ever stopped to ask ourselves, why? Out of the 35,000 different species of spiders, only about 12 of them are actually harmful to humans. We've been taught to harbor this irrational fear against these tiny little creatures for our entire lives, despite the fact that many of us haven't even come into a harmful encounter with a spider. The irrational fear we hold against spiders is the same irrational fear we hold against those who are mentally ill. This fear is known as stigmatism, and stigmatism on mental illness, as said by Harry Croft, MD, of the Stand Up for Mental Health campaign, is when those who have mental illnesses feel diminished, devalued, and isolated within society because of the negative attitude society holds towards them. Which is why we as a society need to abolish this shameful stigma. So come with me as we build our web out of the many ways stigmatism presents itself within society, how it can harm those it's directed towards, and lastly, exactly what we can do to put an end to stigmatism. Let's go ahead and get started on our web. The first strand consists of the fact that, with stigmatism, those who have mental illnesses are typically more isolated within society. Normally, this is due to the pitiful perception that those who have mental illnesses are violent or dangerous. The media doesn't exactly help with this. Most characters in movies and TV shows who have mental illnesses are portrayed as scary. Take the horror/thriller film Psycho, whose main character, Norman Bates, has dissociative identity disorder and is portrayed as a serial killer, leading his audience to believe that many people who have his mental illness are people to be afraid of. Mental illnesses are actually a lot closer to us than one might originally think. According to the National Alliance on Mental Illness, approximately 1 in 5 adults in the U.S. will develop a mental illness per year. Similarly, according to the American Psychiatric Association, over 50% of all mental illness cases develop by age 14. And over 24% develop by age 24. This means that your friends, your parents, your grandparents, and your siblings could all be at risk of developing a mental illness at any point in their lives. Because mental illnesses are ultimately intertwined with our everyday lives, this means that stigmatism is bound to make its way in there whether we like it or not. Which brings me to the next strand of our web. The negative effects mental illness stigma has on those who are mentally ill. A lot of the times when one has a mental illness, the other people around that person are often afraid to go around them because they think that they'll catch that person's mental illness as one might catch a cold. It's ridiculous and, quite frankly, disgusting. These stories are one in many of its kind. Chances are, if you have a mental illness, you will experience stigmatism at some point in your life. The most common form of stigmatism is known as social stigma, and within social stigma, those who have mental illnesses are typically held responsible for, and even blamed for their symptoms. As a result, these people are robbed of good jobs, safe housing, and satisfactory health care. According to The Atlantic, the yearly unemployment rate for those who are mentally ill is 30 to 60%. The yearly cost for the treatment of mental illnesses in America is $193.2 billion. But if these people are unable to pay their dues and get the help they need, what happens? Many who are left untreated take their lives. But social stigma is not the only thing present within society. There's self-stigma as well. Where social stigma is the discrimination and prejudice people within society turn against those who are mentally ill, self-stigma is the prejudice and discrimination these people hold against themselves. Self-stigma will often result in a why try type of attitude that slows down the process of recovery. Further, after already dealing with their own mental illnesses, self-stigma can cause people to try to avoid and even suppress their symptoms. But how exactly do we abolish stigma, might you ask? Well, welcome to the third and final strand of our web, solutions. Take a look around with your 8 eyes. You may see that in order to put an end to stigmatism, one must practice empathy. Put yourself into their shoes. Think of what it feels like to them when you practice stigma, how hurt and isolated they must feel. Believing that those who are mentally ill are the cause of most crimes is not only ridiculous, but completely incorrect. According to The Atlantic, only about 2% of all homicide cases were committed by someone who is mentally ill. Not to mention the fact that when given the correct medication, these people are able to function within society as normal human beings. Another thing that we ourselves can do to put an end to stigmatism is to encourage equality between physical and mental health. Seeing as mental health is, in fact, a disease, it should be treated as and seen as just that. And lastly, if you yourself happen to have a mental illness, remember this. Harboring stigma against others is bad, but harboring stigma against yourself is an entirely different story. Remind yourself that your mental illness is valid and you deserve treatment regardless of what other people say or how they make you feel. Now, at last, it is finally time to crawl back to our newly made web, where we've seen the many ways stigmatism presents itself in society, how it can harm those it's directed towards, and lastly, exactly what we can do to put an end to stigmatism. Most spiders will not harm you, so I hope you'll take it upon yourself to tell others that they should not be afraid of spiders in the same way that they should not be afraid of those who are mentally ill. Thank you.